All right, so we are live. Excuse me. We are live. Search for Huru Dynasty here, and I have the brother Awini Baba with us again this evening. I know it's early morning where he's at in Ghana, but today the subject is how Europeans set up Africa to fail. Now I know there's actually a book I believe written on this subject matter that kind of talks about, obviously what Europeans put in place during colonialism, and then goes into detail after colonialism through foreign aid, through I know a lot of times at the end of colonialism, with some of the Europeans, especially English and the French, when they left countries that they colonialized, they destroyed the infrastructure when they left. We talk about putting in. They talked about putting in their puppet leaders, killing our progressive leaders, whether it be Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara. Also, what they did to Nana Nkrumah as far as sending him on exile. And then slavery. People don't understand. Slavery in itself crippled or set Africa up for failure. So it's a lot to discuss. So, Brother Awini, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I'm getting some feedback here. Okay. So thank you once more, Dynast, and I want to say hi to that's on the channel. Yeah, this topic is so broad. I mean, it stretches right from when we started interacting with outsiders, but especially when Europe developed, ships and obtained weaponry, to make voyages. And we have to bear in mind that they are not the first to do so. We made voyages to the Americas, through the empires in that area that is called Mali. Right now, we did travel.
Abu Bukhari.
Yeah, Abu Bakr, yeah, did travel. Evidence also suggests that the people of Kemet, Egypt, also did make voyages. They had ships. Uh, so traveling by sea was not, brought by Europeans. Europeans exploited it. They exploited it and they used it to gain undue advantage over others, especially, uh, you did mention one, that's Walter Rodney, Europe under
Are you there?
I know that's in relation to this.
Yeah, you sort of went out. When you say that one more time.
I said the book. There's a book, I think,
Right.
Walter Rodney, I stand to be corrected, entitled "How Europe Underdeveloped Africa."
Correct.
It's a good,
exactly. That's the book. Right. That's the name of the book.
it's a good book, to give basic, in economic terms, data or information as to how it is that Africa is the way it is today. Um, I want to state that we're not entirely blaming our situation on anybody. I am of the position that we should blame our situation on ourselves. Why?
Correct.
Because we have not responded well enough. And it is on that level that we can have this discussion and try to see the way forward from here, and to see how our response can be different. But right from times, coming down, when slavery was supposedly abolished, colonialism stayed with Africa. Now, Africans in the diaspora were, enslaved And even after the abolition of slavery, they still had to to make ends meet, in the new system. And from what I read from historians such as Professor Clark, this brought about separate communities for Africans in the diaspora, especially in America, where you have, a balance, a mixture of, people of European ancestry and people of African ancestry. The black communities pretty much had to begin to see how they could thrive on their own. This would have led to the establishment of businesses, including, hotels, retail shops, pretty much, the basic things needed for life. Uh, we can't go without mentioning the founding of Tuskegee,
Correct.
the role of Booker T. Washington, and all of them. With the this was good for Africans in the diaspora, in my view, because it taught Africans how to do things for themselves.
Okay.
You see, but with the announcement of integration, uh, we stopped doing all that. You see, or pretty much it scaled down, way down. Instead of booming and growing, it pretty much that spark was lost. When we became integrated, I'm not saying integration is wrong. I'm only saying that if you're going to integrate, it doesn't mean you should stop doing things for yourself.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah. So that watered down the industrial drive of people in the diaspora in America, in particular, that I gather from my sources. If you come to the African side, and from what I understand, pretty much most of the Caribbean, you find that post-colonialism, Africa was looking mighty bright in
Yes.
terms of its future. You see, we had today. I was watching, a video of when Nkrumah caused a meeting to come about, meeting of African states in Accra, and the Liberian president spoke. I think the name was Tubman,
Yeah, yeah.
something Tubman.
Either Tolbert or Tubman. I think it was Tubman.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, he spoke. Yeah, so all of these things were happening in Africa, and Africa's future was very good because we we started off as a people who just wanted to do our best and to be
Yeah, not to cut you
independent.
off. It was William Tubman. Correct.
Yeah, Tubman, exactly. So we our leaders had their sights, on Africa. They weren't looking elsewhere.
Awini.
Because
Okay. We have
pull Africa,
Awini. We had
even
lost.
though Africa, yeah,
We had lost you for a second, but go
I'm
ahead.
breaking off.
But you're back now. Go ahead.
All right. So if we remember, there were attempts to pull Africa into this, dichotomy, or tug of war between the East and the West, and it was socialism versus capitalism. And I remember the words of Nkrumah. Nkrumah said, "Africa looks, neither left nor right. We look forward," which is to say, we don't want to get pulled into other people's ideology and to be used as such. What we need to do is to fashion out our own power base based on our own ideology, and then we decide how it is we interact with whichever group we need to interact with or have a relationship with. It should be mutually beneficial.
Mm.
and not one-sided as we have it today. You would recall, the likes of, Emperor Haile Selassie,
Yes.
all of them going around the world and making historic, statements about why it is that the world needs to, look carefully at the situation of Africa and why it is so important that world peace should be preserved. There
Mm.
are some who even go so far as to say uh, Emperor Haile Selassie inspired, the creation of the UN, which, from what I understand, he made a speech to
The United Nations or the African Union?
the United Nations.
Oh wow. Okay.
He made that. He made a speech, I think, to the League of Nations. I think that was before I think World War II,
Okay.
or is it one of them? And it is those words that Bob Marley captured in his song "War."
Mm.
You know, and just to highlight that African leaders were, making strides. I can give you a long tale of my own country under Nkrumah. Nkrumah, when he took over, infrastructure in Ghana was nothing to write home about. The colonial powers,
Hmm.
specifically speaking, the British, had set up Ghana in a way, and Nkrumah says in his book, with the road infrastructure and the railway infrastructure fanning outward, which means that the infrastructure was established to facilitate the expedient exploitation of raw material from Ghana and other African countries. So you had rail systems set up along lines where, resources, raw materials would be exploited and sent straight to the coast, to be sent to Europe. You see, hospitals, pretty much the biggest hospital which we in Ghana, Kolebu. This hospital was not meant for Africans. It was meant for Europeans.
Hmm.
And if you found an African there, he was just a cleaner or doing a menial job in these establishments. Education was reserved for a few privileged people, especially the children of merchants who came here and had mulatto children with Ghanaian women. You know, it was reserved for missionaries and their offspring. Was reserved for, you know high-ranking traditional leaders such as chiefs, and their children. It wasn't meant for some of us.
Mm.
You see. When Nkrumah took over, he resisted the temptation not to expand education. There are people who make the argument that when you expand education, and it's true, when you expand education and you don't follow it up with the needed infrastructure, I'm talking about, good buildings, school buildings, teachers, appropriate curriculum, and the likes. If you don't follow it up with that, then the quality goes down. So there are people who would argue that, Nkrumah should not have expanded education, access to education, and at the expense of quality. But for Nkrumah, a little education was better than none.
Mm.
And I'm talking of the right kind of education. You can be educated and brainwashed and be worse off. But if you have the right kind of education, even if it's so little and it's not of that good quality, it's still better than not having education at all. So he went ahead and built so many schools, including, the famous Kwame Nkrumah University of Technology in Kumasi. He
That's in Kumasi, right?
Yeah, that's in Kumasi.
Okay.
He was also involved in the establishment of the School of Mines, to deal specifically with, mineral resources in this country and how to get the most out of him. Legon would have received, which is University of Ghana, also received a lot of attention under Nkrumah. There were not less than 400 factories established under Nkrumah. Nkrumah established a ranch, which would supply, meat. There was a tanning factory. There was a leather factory. He also spearheaded the incoming of our first electricity project, which is the Akosombo Dam. And the primary aim of which was to, provide electricity to industries. So there was an aluminum, smelting factory attached to it called Valco. There was just so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
Ghana had its own shipping line. Ghana had its own ships, called the Black Star Line.
Right now, was that Ghana or Marcus Garvey with the Black Star Line?
Yeah, Marcus Garvey inspired Nkrumah to do the same. Nkrumah also had Black Star.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It was at this time Nkrumah would be working with Africans in the diaspora, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, such as Martin Luther King,
Okay.
and others that I cannot mention here. We had our own airline.
Mm-hmm.
That, from what I understand, people give a testimony that when that airline touched down in America, and some African Black Americans saw, a plane that was being, flown, and pretty much managed by Black people, it brought tears to their eyes.
I believe it.
Yeah, to see that. So there was that spark there. The people talking about, Africa being incapable today,
Mm-hmm.
they would remember to admit that Africa came from a deficit, a disadvantaged position, and it rose up against all odds. That hope, that spark was there, and it's still there. It's just watered down. It's still there. But the colonialists, they weren't happy that they had to leave. In some cases, they had to be forced to leave. And obviously, in their leaving, they would still look for ways to continue to control Africa, because Africa.
Well, after you finish your thought, I have a couple questions. Then I have a question. Have a couple questions from the audience, and then I have a question as well. But go ahead and finish your thought real quick.
Yeah. So they weren't happy about leaving. They were not. And a lot of them, some of them were forced to leave, and they definitely, if you look at the rapid rate at which Africa gained independence between the 50s and 60s, you have to admit that there was an ulterior, a master plan to artificially give us political independence and yet retain control of Africa through economic dependency and economic theatrics. You see? So let me just pause here and then take the question.
Go ahead. Take your time. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the intention that we were granted freedom. Nobody grants you freedom, because it means the person has to lose what they were gaining from oppressing you. You see? So They weren't happy about leaving, and they weren't happy because they knew that they still needed resources from Africa, and they ensured that when they were leaving, they had divided the people, especially there was a lot of division in Ghana in its early days, and some, and I hate to say this, some Ghanaians were used to get rid of Nkrumah and backward ways and return it to the hands of imperialists and neo-colonialists. And this pretty much is the story of Africa all over. If Europe was for the best interest of Africa, I want them to answer this question.
They're
Why
not, but
did they mastermind? Yeah, why would they mastermind the assassination of the early first generation African leaders? Why would they do that?
I
And
mean,
if you look at,
because they weren't in the best interest of Africans.
yes, they're not in the best interest of Africans, and they put puppets. Some of these puppets were ill trained. If you pair ill training with a lack of will to help Africa, it's a recipe for disaster. These people don't care, you see, and so they then have the chance to stand on that and say, you see, they can't rule themselves. You see, and some people are even advocating for Africa to be recolonized and re-enslaved. You see, based on the fact that they say African leaders cannot handle anything, that they can't rule themselves. That is false.
Hmm.
You have the wrong people in leadership positions in Africa. That's what's happening. And they reduced voting in Africa to, trivial, reasons for voting. People ordinarily would vote based on reason and say, okay, what can this person bring to me? Now it's based on issues of tribe. These elements were there, in the early days. I wouldn't say they were not there, because under Nkrumah, there were tribal parties in Ghana. And Nkrumah said, no, you can't have tribal parties. So he put legislature to ban the formation of political parties around ethnicity, and said you can have a political party, but you can't say this is the party for an ethnic group of people. And people, legislature through Nkrumah, and this ultimately forced those parties, small parties, to come together to form the United Party, which which is the grandfather of the party which is in government in Ghana today.
Hmm.
You see, so to create the impression that Africans cannot rule themselves is utterly insulting and is so far from the truth, because we have produced the talents to rule, Africa, but they're just not in place. We have puppets in place to please the Western master. That's what we have right now. They don't, if you study their policy, they don't take policy decisions with Africa's interests first in mind. They always have to see how they can balance the interests of Africa with that of the colonial master.
Hmm.
And with the propagation of this sort of ruling or leadership, we can only have all of the problems we're having, you see. And Europeans and other people in the world are going to look and say, look, Africans can rule themselves. We have ruled ourselves longer than any people on the face of the earth. That is something I want to categorically state. Before Europeans came here, we had kingdoms and we had structures, political structures that were functional, and they worked. You see? So why is it that there seems to be a gap in governance and leadership and all that? You see? The reality of the matter is Europeans or colonialists, imperialists, eliminated, even later on, when we had people, leaders such as Thomas Sankara, for instance. Thomas Sankara was doing very well for his country. What happened to Thomas Sankara? They had to take a brother, Blaise Compaoré, and use that
Right.
brother to get rid of Thomas Sankara. And Blaise ruled from around 1987 till quite recently. He
Yeah,
ruled
like
for over 20 years.
2012. Well, no, not man.
Yeah,
2014, maybe.
yeah, thereabout. He ruled without France saying anything. You see,
Right. Of course.
convenient. You see, so all these stooges we have in leadership positions in Africa, they are the ones who are collaborating with our enemies, and they are the reasons why we are not seeing the progress we want to see. And therefore, one can conclude that it is the neo-colonialists, Europeans, who put this architecture in place to continue to control Africa. You see? And so that they can come back and claim that we are incapable of ruling ourselves. And therefore, they need to come back and show us how to do it. This is all trickery, in my view. Africa does not have a leadership deficit. You see, because to lead, you don't need to know it all. You only need to have a good team to work with. You see, that's all that's needed. And the team will consist of people with different skills in different areas. You see, so to create the impression that a leader must be, a walking, repository of everything, knowledge. No, it doesn't happen. You can't find a human being like that. You see, so Africa does not have a deficit. Why is it that an African, a Ghanaian, Kofi Annan, was the UN General Secretary and he did well?
Okay.
I
Let
can go on.
Let me ask you this: how did Africa benefit from Kofi Annan being in this position?
Well, I can say from the Ghanaian perspective, there's a Kofi Annan peacekeeping center in Accra as we speak. I don't know about other African countries, but what I read recently, Kofi Annan is spearheading, I think, a green revolution in Africa, something like that. Uh, yeah, but to pinpoint, I'd have to refer more. But what I know is, uh, when he became the UN General Secretary, Ghanaians were all like, he's a Ghanaian and all, and Africans were like that. But people still forget that the person has to play a role that is universal, you see? And that's the issue with some of these positions, you see? But I use that to demonstrate that there's nothing in the genes of Africans that prevents them from doing what they want to do in terms of leadership. There's nothing. You see, you don't even look. In some cases, we have had leaders in Africa who didn't even have formal education that did better than leaders who were professors in their own right, in their own field. You see, it's about having the right, a good heart, I would just say, and having the interest of Africa at heart. That's the most and first and foremost thing that any African leader should have. Now, you have African leaders taking African money and sending it into Swiss banks, and going and building infrastructure abroad. African leaders embezzling African funds and taking it abroad to invest. They have no faith in their own leadership. That's what I make of it. You see, these people are inimical to our development, and until see it, we're not going to see the progress we want to see. Because if you look at their policies, if you want to know what they intend to do, look at their policy. What does their policy say? What is their guiding principle when it comes to various things? A lot of them will tell you, we want to be importing things. You tell them, okay, why should we be importing, for instance, rice and maize and all of these things when we have the land here, we have the rainfall? They can't tell you anything reasonable. They keep giving you excuses, you see, why they should not invest in their own countries. You see, and then you have to come to the conclusion that these people were put there to do these things. They're not for Africa's interest, I'm sorry to say.
All right, cool. Can we ask questions?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So question number one is, I just had it in front of me. What role do you know did Liberia play in the liberation movement on the African continent?
Yeah, I would say pretty much inspiration. A lot of African countries were inspired by Liberia and what it stood for. I think that at the time Ghana gained independence, there was such a close relationship between us and Liberians, because obviously of our status, so definitely, I did mention that Liberia gave. I know some of the help wouldn't be disclosed, but I do know that Liberia did assist in, shaping a lot of the newly born African in the form of, at the institutions and what have you. And so did Ghana under Nkrumah, who stretched his hand out to other African countries.
Okay. All right, let's see. There's a lot of static in the background. Like you might be rubbing your mic or your phone on something.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another question too. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on the new president? Is Kofi Appentang, is that the new president of Ghana?
No, yeah, His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo.
Okay. Do you know Kofi Appentang?
No, I don't know Kofi.
You don't? Okay.
What? No, he. Let me see. No, I'm not familiar with the name. I don't know what the person is trying to refer to.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Continue. So those were the couple questions we had.
Yeah. So for what he represents, he's doing his best. But some of us who are unapologetically Nkrumahist and Pan-Africanists, we find a lot wrong with the trajectory, the direction Ghana has decided to go by. And to my primary concern with the direction we're headed is that we are still, the president has made it clear that Ghana should rise above aid, that we should look at Ghana beyond aid, which is a good call.
Hey, you're going in, like you went real low. We can't. You're going in and out.
Oh, okay. Let me.
There you go. That's better. There you go.
Yeah. So the president has made a clarion call for Ghana to take care of itself, without aid. So it's like Ghana beyond aid, which is a good thing, But in order for this to happen, certain things need to be in place. That is the important thing. And those things that need to be in place are issues of the sustainability of the economy. You cannot sustain an economy if you are not producing. You see, there's a deficit between what we import and what we export. You see, and this is the problem. You cannot possibly explain to me why it is that in this day and age, Ghana cannot be food sufficient. Ghana is still importing in large quantities rice and other foods that we have the land and the weather to produce here. And for the position that these governments after Nkrumah are taking is that we are neoliberal economists. We should not interfere in the market. We should allow the market forces to shape the economy, which is essentially saying that let's take our hands out and allow things to go,
Winnie, it's the sound is fluctuating. So
let me see whether I can. How's it now?
That's better. Go ahead. That's perfect.
All right. So to say that the government should keep its hands out of the business that brings real money into the economy is to say that a father should watch his son or daughter grow up the way his son or daughter can do by their own. You see, which is wrong. You cannot fold your arms and say, I shouldn't interfere in these fundamental economic policies. And these are the policies that continue to work against us. We are losing a lot of money by just importing stuff all the time. Stuff we can produce here. And we have to keep using the dollar. And this gives the dollar more power over our currency. Because always you need dollars to go to the international market and buy things. You see? And so all of these fundamental economic questions about who controls the economy, this is at the heart of our issue. And this is at the heart of where I disagree with subsequent governments that have come, especially the last two. You see, it's because they have followed the IMF. They have followed the IMF to the letter, and they have sunk further into, dependency. Because we started dealing with the IMF in 1983, and we're still dealing with the IMF today. And when you ask the question, what is your plan? And I'm talking about the politicians of Ghana and the leaders. What plan do you people have for Ghana to become truly independent? They can't tell you because they don't have any plans of Ghana becoming truly independent anytime soon. That is the reality. And until this fundamental issue of the control of the economy is tackled, I don't really see anything. I'm not saying things are all that bad. I'm just saying that the progress we could have made, we won't make it. We won't. Because government needs to take deliberate action in order to control the economy to the interest or in the interest of Ghana, not in the interest of somebody else. A corporation that has paid a government official some money to take a decision that is bad for Ghana and for other African countries. So essentially, I do not expect anything spectacular to happen. I expect business as usual. We don't produce. We produce very little. And it is in this space that the last time we had a discussion about agriculture, it is this space that people in the diaspora can fail. If you really want to invest yes, there is space for agricultural investments in Ghana. That I can assure you. And in a lot of cases, there is ready market. You see, because even the rice producers here have ready market for their rice. You see, and we have a company here that is, it's even in my town, in Tamale here, because a lot of the rice is grown up north because we have clay, that holds water, because water is large quantities of water is needed for the production of rice, for rice to thrive and grow. So a lot of it is grown here. We have a company here that is not owned by Ghanaians. It's owned, I think, by, I don't know if it's Arabs or Indians, one of them.
Which
And
comes to our next question. What role did Arabs play in the underdevelopment of Africa, if any?
yeah, if you look at the issue of slavery, it started with our Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it did start with Arabs, and uh, our interaction with Arabs has been good and bad. At one point, if you look at the ancient empires, if you look at the Ghana Empire, there was trade.
Winnie, you're going in and out again, but you sound good now.
You see, if you look at the ancient empires of Africa, especially West Africa, such as the Ghana Empire, there was trade between Arabs and Africans. There was trade. But at a point in time, when you study, our history quite well, this is well recorded in a book by Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, Pre-Colonial Black Africa.
Mm-hmm.
This is well recorded by a sheikh, and it came to a point where force was being used against Africans. You will remember that the civilization in Mali, Timbuktu, was destroyed by Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
It was destroyed by them. They came there and they interbred and used half breeds, mulattoes, to control the place. And this has been used a lot in our history. When people come, they don't want to directly impose themselves or make it seem like they are the ones in control. They have children with African women, and the offspring of that union becomes an instrument to control Africa, because the offspring always takes the side of the father who is in power. This offspring seldom takes the position of. So definitely, the Arabs caused a lot of havoc in our early civilizations.
Cool. Perfect. Let's see what other questions we have in here. Let's see here. Everybody, thank you so much for super chatting. If you have not received a postcard, these are the options for the postcards. You either me with the Ashanti Royal Bodyguards or me with the King of Alada. So please email me at searchforahuru@gmail.com and I will send you a postcard. That's only if you have not received one yet. So I appreciate you guys for super chatting. Let's see here. We got any more questions in the chat room? What's up, little T? Any questions in the chat room? Let me ask you, what role does the traditional kings and chiefs play in I would say everyday Africa, just as far as politics and government?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same all over Africa. I think in a country like Tanzania,
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand, the Julius Nyerere did put in place measures to sort of take power away from local representatives. This is what I heard. Anybody has information contrary can state so, but so the power of traditional leaders, politicians, is not as strong there as it would be in Ghana. Now, if you come to Ghana, I mean, you're talking about in other countries in West Africa, of course. You're talking about the role that traditional leaders play in ensuring stability, because that is the local level. That's the lowest level you can go when you're dealing with countries such as Ghana and Nigeria and other places. There's an interplay between the chiefs and the modern politicians, because we have to remember something. Before the modern politicians came, the chiefs were the politicians of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The kings, these were the politicians, and a lot of them had systems in place to rule, and these systems were very effective. Now, with the coming of the modern politicians, a lot of the chiefs had to lose some of that power.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and it ultimately led to, in some cases, tension between, people who used to enjoy autonomy, and the new leader, of a newly formed country. You see, so I'll give you in Ghana, for instance, how that issue has been dealt with. We have an institution called the House of Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And the House of Chiefs primarily is to ensure that issues related to chieftaincy in Ghana are dealt with by the chiefs themselves. So, in the event that you have, conflicts, sometimes people fight over chieftaincy for obvious reasons. It gives you power. You have control over some lands and some natural resources, as we see in the case of the Ashanti, in the case of chiefs and people in Brown Half, and pretty much all over Ghana. There's what you call royalties that is paid to chiefs whenever a natural resource is to be exploited. So if there's gold in your area, you get a percentage that is paid to you as a chief, as enshrined by Ghanaian constitution. So I'll take the example of Ghana conflict resolution, to see to it that there's overall stability in the various ethnicities in Ghana, and to also bridge the gap between modern
Hey,
politics.
Winnie, I was gonna say your volume again. It's kind of going.
Wow. Let me see if I can reposition. Okay.
Okay, that's better.
How's it now?
That's better. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So pretty much they act as a bridge between the local politics and which is African politics, and Western politics, which is the national politics. And in Ghana, they enjoy a lot of privileges. The government treats them specially. There are some people who think that chieftaincy should be abandoned in Ghana. There are some who honestly feel so, because they say they don't know their use. But in a lot of our communities, like if you come to my the king is not only a political figure locally, he's also a spiritual leader. So he has to take the lead in ensuring that all the major deities, gods that are identified with
Winnie.
Okay. Ethnicities.
All right, we had lost you for a second, but you're back. Go ahead.
Yeah, so handling the issues of appeasement of the gods. This is also within the custody of the king or the chief in certain areas, and he does this in consultation with the chief priest or the high priest and what have you. And these roles are still very relevant in Ghana. and I don't see chieftaincy going anywhere, because as we speak, the chiefs, for instance, where I live, the king, the overlord of the area I live in is called Dagwa. It's called Dagwa. So in this area, if you acquire a piece of property, for instance, land, and I'm referring to land, uh, ultimately it is the king's signature that has to go on there, on your indenture. The king's signature has to go on there to say, okay, I grant you permission to own a piece of property in my area.
Mm.
And this has nothing to do with the government. The government facilitates the process, but it's ultimately the king who has the power. And this is set up to ensure that land remains in the hands of the people, not anybody else.
Mm.
So, but we have had a few cases where that has been abused, because this means that kings and people can sell lands, and what have you. But pretty much, I support it 100%. If we hadn't gone that way, we may have been in the position of South Africa right now.
Mm. Let's see if we got any questions in the chat room. Oh, we did have a question in the chat room. Let me scroll back up to it. The question was, from the outside, Ghana seems to be leading the Pan-African movement on the continent. More African Americans are relocating there than any other country. Do you see a culture shift on the ground?
Culture shift, as in, I want the person to be specific.
Let's in fact, really good hip hop culture shift, as in, if you could be more specific. And let me ask this next question. What's Africa's position on dismantling modern European political structures there?
Yeah, I think that we inherited these systems, and that's part of the struggle that Africa is faced with. You see, because we have to now inherit something that wasn't designed by us, and make it work somehow. So it's really challenging, because in some cases it's very difficult to enforce certain aspects of governance and law and what have you. It's very difficult, because you cannot go against, for instance, a king in his area. uh, Even if you're a president, you wouldn't dare. You see, some may use force, but it won't last. So it has come with a lot of challenges. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but I feel it needs to be tweaked or tailored more to, give it an African, look, in order for it to be more effective. You see, but let me attempt to address the question of culture shift.
Mm-hmm.
My impression of it is that the attitudes of people, the way people live, will change in terms of external influence. You see, so
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, you know, that issue of changes in culture has been ongoing for a long time now. So obviously, uh, Ghanaians are, even though we embrace our culture and what have you, a lot of our modern youth. And I remember you had a discussion with a brother who was talking about African Americans appropriating you know uh, uh, African clothing and all of that. A lot of modern Ghanaians that I know,
Dressed like
uh,
Black Americans.
yeah, they dress like pretty much like anybody anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because a lot of the clothing that we use here It's not
It comes
produced
from
here.
us. They
You have to remember
yeah.
that. All right, it's not produced here. The little we produce and put on the market, it's a bit expensive for people, to be honest. Like I use a smock that is, typically Ghanaian, and a lot of people wear them. I use that, but I only have one because it's so expensive. You see, it's so expensive to buy, so I can only afford one. You know, rich people have several of them that they wear, and it looks good, and so on. The issue of kente. How many people in Ghana can afford, original kente,
Oh, it's expensive.
which is, it's really expensive. So this is creating a problem, in terms of, dressing, even in terms of food. A lot of Ghanaians consume rice
Mm-hmm.
these days. I mean, it's a staple in Ghana. It's so high that our self-sufficiency is only about 30%. It means we only produce 30% of the rice we consume. The rest is imported. So rice, eating rice and so on. It's not typically Ghanaian, in all honesty, because when you study most
Yeah, it's not.
cultures,
It seems
we
like it is imported. The rice, correct?
yeah, but locally we did have our own rice. We still have our local rice, which is
Mhm.
wild rice. You find that it's wild rice, but we only ate rice during certain seasons. Our staple, for instance, I'll give you a glancing look at African state Ghanaian staple. So most of the northern sector we consumed before the advent of rice, millet.
Mm-hmm.
You see, millet, uh, some parts fonio, um, but pretty much millet was the staple. So the typical northern diet would be millet cakes. Millet cakes are very nice. You should try them. You know, and that will be for breakfast. So millet cakes and porridge. You just have a light porridge in the morning, and in the afternoon you would have the same thing. You still have porridge, and in the night you could have, what we call TZ, which is, another a meal prepared from millet, but it's much thicker, and you eat that with soup, vegetable soup. If you go south, you find the staple there was cassava,
Mm.
yam,
Right.
and they would have it with, they have in a form called fufu,
Mm-hmm.
which is nice.
Banku.
You know,
Banku.
Banku, exactly, all these staples. So, but now you find a lot of Ghanaians consuming rice more, you see, because it is available, and it,
Right.
it appears to be a quick choice. You see, so definitely in terms of a culture shift, if you examine the things that make up Ghanaian culture, definitely there has been a shift for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And even in terms of behavior, what do you call it, dating, and all of these things, the way people date these days, and partnership and all of that, it has changed significantly. You see, not necessarily even because you have Americans and other people moving here. It's just the media feeding the minds of people with all of this, and people want to have a Romeo and Juliet kind of love. I don't know what that means, because they get married and they can't stay together.
Right.
You see, yeah. So definitely a lot of things are changing here, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's that bad, because there is still the moral voice that exists, and keeps things in check. Pretty much from the family structure.
Hmm. I think we had a couple. I think we had another question in the chat room. Let's see here. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Here we go. The biggest problem with Africa is the border is easy to import from non-African country than African country, and people can't move freely. What's your thoughts on that statement, Awini?
I agree 100%. It's so absurd when you look at the trade in Africa. Uh, African countries trade more with the outside world than they trade among themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and this is not intentional; it's by design. But we have economic communities, like we have the ECOWAS,
Right.
which is the economic community of West African states. But but to what extent are our markets integrated? That's another question, because you can't have an integrated market if you treat a Nigerian the same way you treat a European.
I agree.
This becomes an obstacle. You see, you go to Europe, movement within Europe, especially the EU, is so free. If you have a Schengen visa, you can move about freely, no problem. West Africa has a similar thing, or was supposed to have a similar thing, because I have a passport and it's written there, ECOWAS passport.
Mm-hmm.
So you put ECOWAS passport and then you have Ghana, the country. So all of this, it shows efforts to try to integrate the countries more, regionally, but it's not working as fast as some of us would want it to work. You see, so I agree 100% that a lot more is needed for not only economic integration, but social integration. People should be able to move about more freely. I think East Africa is also making a lot of strides in that effort. Especially the relationship between Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda. It's not bad at all, but it could be a lot better if we have a decisive, you know, policy to deal with this. And this is also tied to the issue of dependency and the fact that we have bad policies. You see, because all of this is interrelated. Because you can't tell me right now we've signed on to what is called the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU. So West Africa has signed on to that. And what this does is it it enjoins the West African sub-region uh, to reduce tariffs. So if Europe or European companies bring in goods and services, instead of charging them, let's say $10 per item at the port, this policy seeks to say, okay, remove it, remove the 10, and make it maybe $1 or even nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and what this does is that it goes in to collapse uh, local small businesses doing small things, because if you go in within Ghana, the same treatment is not given to the local businessman. So what happens is his goods become more expensive than what is imported, and this means that he goes out of business. See, so it is these issues that are really affecting our unity, which is what the AU is about, which is what Nkrumah was advocating until he died, is proper integration, economic and socially. We must integrate if we want to see any progress.
Now let's see if we got any more questions in the chat room. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Please get the likes up. So as you enter the chat or the stream, please get the likes up. Also share the videos. If you're new to the platform, please subscribe. Let's see who else we got here. What other questions we have? I know we have some questions over here on Facebook. Let's see here. So back on Liberia, if you in fact, let me ask you this: are you familiar with the Achimota school in Ghana that was structured after Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee model? Are you familiar with that school? Achimota, Awini. Hello, hello. I think we lost Awini. He'll hop back on. Probably the connection where he's at is went out. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you are new to the platform, please like and share and subscribe as well. Also, too, after the stream is over, please go to searchforhuru.com. Please go to dynastymirror.com and please go to amazon.com. Search your name, Dynasty Mirror. Please buy a book. Also, make sure you go to search for Huru on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, if you're late to the discussion is on how Europeans set up Africa to fail. And then there's a book. Let me find the book real quick so I can post it in the chat room that deals with this subject. Let's see here. Well, there's a book on that. When he comes back on, I'll have him give you the name of the book and author. But it has to do with how Europeans set up Africa to fail. Dealing with at the end of colonialism, you have foreign aid, of course, the IMF, puppet leaders, assassination of leaders who were moving Africa forwardly. Sultan, hold on. Let me check out your questions. Hold on. All right, Awini, you're back.
Yeah. I ran out of credit, but yeah.
Okay, here we go. So one last question then. All right. Africans are confused about two concepts: culture and traditions. That situation led to perceiving modernity. Modernity as being European. You can't fight what you desire to be. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the questioner has a point, because if we don't draw a line between being modern and being, traditional, then there's a problem. You can be traditional and be modern at the same time. You see, some people think that you can hold on to your culture and still, somehow embrace what other people bring. What I'm looking at is elements of modernity. If modernity means we use, the latest technology, we use whatever means enhances life, then definitely we should embrace that. I mean, that is progressive. We're having this conversation now because of technology.
Correct.
So definitely yes, but I don't know of any African that rejects this. I know that some Africans have some confusion about what Africa is, or even what it was. So when people want to identify with Africa, what they do is they go and pick the most primitive, group,
right,
and they portray this as the center of Africa, which is wrong. If we want to celebrate African ingenuity, we have to go and pick and handpick the greatest and those who have created, great civilizations and have invented great technology. This is what highlights the peak of our civilization. You see, so to associate Africa with primitive living, utterly disturbing and utterly insulting. Every group has primitive people. And you go to Eastern Europe, you'll find a lot of people still struggling as we speak. You go anywhere in the world, you still find villages, in appalling conditions. So those who seek to, paint Africa in a bad light all the time, they have some of us to contend with, because we can prove them wrong with facts.
Mm.
That Mali, for instance, at one time had a city larger than any city in Europe at that time.
Right.
You see, so where from all of this, you go even to Nigeria, the ancient Benin Kingdom, which is Benin is a misnomer. It's Ubini, ancient Ubini, kingdom, was so vast, and they still have the Benin walls standing today. You
Mm.
see, and I'm not even going to, Kemet and Nubia and all of that, and even going down to Zimbabwe, to see the great Zimbabwean stone buildings and what have you. Nobody wants to deal with that. They isolate it and make it look as if it's un-African.
Mm-hmm.
You see, but that is the center. That should be the center of Africa. Nobody celebrates his negatives. You always celebrate the positive, and that's what we must begin to do. So to wrap it up, the question is definitely, or the statement has validity in it, and that attitude must change. I am yet to see a movie that really truly gives good commentary to Africa. A lot of them are just portray some backwardness, which I don't watch, because immediately I begin to watch a movie and I realize Africa is being painted as some backward, primitive group of people. I switch it off or I change the channel. We don't need to watch that stuff, because that is somebody else's narrative, and unfortunately, some of our brothers have bought into it. Our own media people have bought into it, and they always jump on anything and say the African way, and they put it out there. But wherever is positive, they don't want to do that. So I agree. We should draw a line in the sand between tradition and culture. You see, and we can create a new culture. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as we don't lose some of the things, elements of our culture that are fundamental to our very existence, we can definitely adapt and do new things and embrace technology. There's nothing European about the technology. Remember that Europe also borrowed from Asia at a point. Europe borrowed from Africa at a point in time. So all technology in the world belongs to everybody.
Mm.
If we, yeah, because if people want to say give us back, and I've heard that a lot, the Europeans will say, okay, if you don't like us, why are you using our car? I said, look, the issue of the car, it didn't start with you. It's a continuum. How did you arrive at making a car? You started somewhere. We also gave you things. So if we ask you to give back the foundations we gave to you, such as in medicine and in the sciences and so on, then you wouldn't have made a car. See, and even writing.
Awini, can we ask one more question? I promise. This is the last question.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
So there was an article that recently came out on how Chinese migrants are building up Africa. What are your thoughts on that statement?
About what?
Chinese migrants building up Africa, like currently are building up Africa. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a mixed feeling. I'll give you an example of how China is involved in Africa's development.
Mm-hmm.
And, pretty much Africa sees China as a development partner. In all honesty, I do not think that China, as people say, is going to take over Africa and it's the next threat and all of that. I don't see so. Because the Chinese, they come in and they make it, I'm not painting Chinese as, being angels or whatever, because they have their own bad people among them. But at least with China, they come in and the terms are on the table. If you want to work with them, you work with them. If you don't, you don't. In Ghana, for instance, our national theater
Mm-hmm.
for the whole country that we're using right now was built by the Chinese government for free.
That's what they say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all know that it wasn't for free. It was just to, build a relationship. But nobody can say, okay, we don't want it. Fine, we'll take it, but it still doesn't tie our hands. You can give me a gift, and if you come to make a silly proposition, I can turn it down. You see, I mean, we we cannot be, we cannot and should not be bought by gifts. You see, I'll give you another example. All the stadia in Ghana that were built for the 2008. So in 2008, Ghana hosted the African Cup of Nations, which is the
Mm-hmm.
CAN. And for that we needed to build stadiums, and the Chinese got that contract, and they finished the stadiums before time, and they worked really fast. In the town I'm staying in right now, Tamale, the Chinese came, and within less than a year, a couple of months, they had built a big stadium,
Mm.
which we still use today for sports and other events. They were working day and night, you see. So pretty much, China has been, a good development partner to Africa, and to say that, well, they're building up Africa, I don't know what that is to mean, as in, they are contributing out of benevolence.
Mm.
I don't believe so. I don't believe anybody will do anything for us for free. They all have ulterior motives, you see. But that is what Professor Clark said: we have no friends. And if you need a friend, look in the mirror. And that's what it is. So if we are able to, work with people who come with propositions and it's in our best interest, why not? But definitely, China has played a major role in especially infrastructural development in a lot of African countries. That's a fact.
Mm. All right, so we'll go ahead and close out, Awini. If there's anything you want to say in closing, and also please give everyone your contact information.
Yeah, I thank Diners and everybody for being part of the discussion. Uh, we must begin to look at Africa from a holistic point of view. Africa has, and African people worldwide, we have succeeded against great odds. I'm telling you, great odds. And we are still being oppressed till this day. There's a constant effort to keep Africa in a subjugated position to ensure that it's exploited. If you look at what is happening in Congo right now, the country is pretty much unstable. But Congo pretty much is the richest resource country in the world. I don't care which country you name. Congo has pretty
Right.
much every natural resource you can think about. But look at how unstable the country is. Look at the history with Patrice Lumumba, and how another African, a brother, Mobutu Sese Seko, was used against him. And again, Mobutu Sese Seko had a long, uninterrupted tenure. Several, over 20 years, he was there. You see, this is how neo-colonialism has worked against Africa. It has succeeded in using Africans, because I keep saying this: nobody can hurt Africans unless Africans collaborate with them. You see, it has succeeded in using our own people against the progress of Africa. And this is portrayed in the world to look like Africa is leaderless and doesn't have the talent, when Africa is booming with talent. Whenever our people move anywhere in the world, they do their best and they make the name. You see, so we shouldn't be fooled by the propaganda that Africa doesn't have what it takes and what have you, and that is why we are in the position we are in right now. That is false. Our early African leaders were deliberately removed by coup plots, assassinations, and the likes, and they were replaced with puppets to help the colonialists to milk Africa. That is the real reason we're in our situation right now. So I want that to sink in and remain with people. That is what we're faced with today. This neo-colonialism.
All right, when you go ahead and give everybody your contact information. So in the people who want to reach Awini and continue the dialogue, please give everyone your contact information where they can reach you.
Yeah, you can reach me on Gmail. That's Awini Baba. That's AWINI Baba, at gmail.com. You can reach me on my cell phone on +233 249 831 251. That's +233 249 831 251. All right. Thank everybody for being part of the show.
All right, Awini, thank you so much. We'll have you back on soon. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Dynasty Mir, Search for Uhuru. Till next time, peace.